Hello and good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here. Just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for your presence here in such an incredibly sensitive moment in history. And in just a few minutes, we'll begin the call. I do want to um, introduce myself. My name is Hanieh Jodat, Iranian American. And it has been an absolute honor and a great pleasure to be a part of the RootsAction family as a partnership director and co-chairing the Diffuse Nuclear War, No War with Iran campaign. Um, I always like to start the calls by saying you could be anywhere this evening, but you chose to be here with us. And that means you're knee deep in the movement with all of us who care about humanity. Um, I there's a quote I live by. I'm going to paraphrase it by James Baldwin, who happens to be my favorite author, who says the world love has never been a popular movement. The world is held together only by a few people. So thank you for being those few people who hold the world together in kindness and empathy and in the anti-war space. Um, I think what we have done is there's 53 people here with us tonight. So thank you so much for joining. I don't know, Bill, if we can, I cannot see the chat. Well, actually, I can. Let us know where you're coming from. Let us know where you're joining from. We do have an incredible, great number of panelists here on the call. We unfortunately, Dr. Azodi, Sina Azodi, who's the assistant professor at George Washington University, was not be able to be here with us. He is unfortunately under the weather. So it'll just be myself, Kevin Martin, and Norman Solomon, whom I will introduce later. But let us begin. And again, I do want to say good evening to you all. Thank you for being here tonight, not just to listen, but to bear witness. We come together tonight at a moment when history is moving faster, much faster than many of us can process, when decisions made by a handful of leaders are reshaping global stability, threatening millions of lives, 93 million plus, and raising urgent constitutional questions here at home. What is happening between the United States of America, a place I was raised in, and Iran, my country where I was born, is not simply another foreign policy dispute. It is a crisis involving war powers, nuclear threats, global energy security, and the fundamental question of accountability in a democracy. Tonight, I want to talk about three things with you: what happened inside of Iran, why the Strait of Hormuz matters to the entire world, and why conversations about articles of impeachment are now emerging. And from our panelists, you're going to hear what has been taking place on the ground in terms of grassroots organizing and what we are going to be looking forward to. Since late February, joint military operations involving US and Israeli forces have struck multiple sites across Iran. These strikes have not been limited to isolated military targets. Reports indicate damage of threats involving bridges and transportation networks, power plants and electrical grids, petrochemical facilities, and areas near nuclear infrastructures. Urban neighborhoods, places I used to walk through to go to school, have also experienced destruction as broader bombing campaigns unfolded. Modern warfare does not stay contained to military installations, unfortunately. When electricity disappears, hospitals struggle to function. When bridges collapse, food and medicine cannot move. When infrastructure fails, civilians suffer first. Millions of ordinary Iranians, families, students, workers, elders now live under uncertainty, blackouts, and fear. We're talking about a population that has experienced living under a totalitarian regime for 47 plus years, suffering from sanctions. And so it is personal. It is a family member checking in across unstable phone lines. It is parents staying awake through the night waiting for the news. I can share my own experience with you all when I say every day my mother, who's now here from Iran to stay through her visa process, her immigration process, has to wait for my auntie to make a call from a landline. Internet is not accessible right now. And we just wait for her, which is really expensive for people to call from Iran, very expensive, but she calls for 5 minutes just to say we're okay. And today, the most heartbreaking conversation took place between two sisters that have been each other's, companion for such a long time. My mother said, if you need to, if there's any attacks, because things are serious, just seek shelter down in the basement. And that reminded me of my childhood living through the Iran-Iraq War. At the center of all of this crisis lies a narrow stretch of water many Americans had rarely heard about before this year, which is the Strait of Hormuz. The passage connects the Persian Gulf to global oceans and carries roughly one-fifth of the world's oil and gas shipments. It is one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. As conflict escalated, Iran restricted passage through the strait, disrupting commercial shipping and sending shockwaves through the global market. The consequences were immediate. Merchants' vessels were damaged, shipping companies halted routes, insurance costs skyrocketed, energy prices rose worldwide. Right now in California, gas prices at the gas station are $6 plus, some places $7. What happens in that narrow waterway affects gas prices, food supply chains, and economic stability across continents. The Strait of Hormuz is not regional geography, it is a pressure point for the global economy. And when military ultimatums are tied to economic choke points, escalation risks spreading far beyond the battlefield. Let's talk briefly about nuclear threat rhetoric and global fear. In the recent days, rhetoric surrounding this conflict intensified dramatically. Statements from the US leadership warned of catastrophic consequences if Iran failed to comply with the demands. Language suggesting the destruction of an entire civilization alarmed diplomats, military analysts, and human rights observers around the world. Nuclear weapons are not ordinary weapons. They erase cities, they poison generations, they transform victory into irreversible tragedy. When nuclear armed nations use existential language, even rhetorically, fear spreads quickly. Allies grow anxious, adversaries harder their positions, and diplomacy becomes harder precisely when it is needed most. History shows escalation rarely follows logic, it absolutely follows fear. And let's talk about the articles of impeachment and why they are now being discussed. Here in our own country, a separate and serious debate has emerged, not about partisan politics, but about constitutional authority. And my colleague Norman Solomon will talk briefly about one of our initiatives through RootsAction shortly here. But the US Constitution gives Congress, not the president, the power to declare war. The War Powers Resolution requires congressional authorization for sustained military engagement. Critics argue that expanded military operations against Iran without explicit approval from Congress raise profound constitutional concerns. And this debate intensified after President Trump decided to post the past few days a message warning that the United States could wipe an entire civilization off the face of this planet. We're talking about one of the oldest civilizations with such rich cultural history and some of the most beautiful UNESCO protected sites. That is if Iran failed to comply with the US demands. Legal scholars, human rights organizations warn that threats of mass destruction directed at civilian population may raise concerns under international humanitarian law. The laws of armed conflict require distinction between military targets and civilians and prohibit threats of indiscriminate devastation. For many lawmakers, the question is not ideological but constitutional. Whether threatening catastrophic force combined with military action undertaken without congressional authorization represent an abuse of executive war powers significant enough to warrant consideration of article of impeachment. Impeachment is not revenge, it is oversight. And we'll talk briefly about that here. But without taking too much time, I do want to send my heartfelt gratitude to Bill Lacamaker for helping us put this event together, Norman Solomon, who I have the pleasure of serving with alongside my other colleagues at RootsAction, who's the co-founder of RootsAction, and Kevin Martin, who is the president of Peace Action and the Peace Action Education Fund. He joined the staff on September 4th, 2001. Kevin previously served as a director of Project Abolition, a national organization effort of nuclear disarmament from August 1999 through August 2001. And he served before as the executive director of Illinois Peace Action, and he has been featured in the Washington Post, The Nation, Los Angeles Times, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the Chicago Tribune, and the Sun-Times, along with CNN. It is an absolute pleasure to have you here with us tonight, Kevin. Um, RootsAction for the past few weeks has been leading on-ground action, grassroots actions all across the country, and Peace Action has always been one of our most committed partners in helping us get the message to in the halls of Congress to Congress members and call out war crimes and so on and so forth. Let's talk about where we are in this moment. Give us, please, an overview of the national peace movement efforts, congressional pressure campaigns, and how advocates can mobilize effectively against escalation, and what is next for us.
Thank you, Hanieh. And I really want to express a personal sentiment to you and to so many Iranian American colleagues and friends that I work with. How you're able to function in this impossible time is very inspiring to me. And I've never been to Iran. I had a chance to go one time and I didn't go, but I helped to organize other delegations, including Peace Action folks, to go to Iran. And every single one of them said that the Iranian people were the kindest, most hospitable hosts they'd ever experienced anywhere in the world. And one of my colleagues has been to 35 or 40 countries. And he said that Iranians were the kindest hosts that he ever experienced. So, and I personally have worked on this issue to prevent war with Iran since 2003. And Peace Action actually started the first No War in Iran working group. People may not remember that at the end of the horrible Iraq War, Dick Cheney was actually trying to arm twist George Bush to invade Iran at the time. And one of the few good things that George Bush did, the W, was to say no to Cheney. So this is an issue, obviously, and also nuclear disarmament. And having worked for the JCPOA, the very effective multilateral agreement that blocked Iran's path to the bomb, that Trump foolishly tore up in his first term. So this is all Trump's fault. This is all Trump's folly in terms of why we're engaged in this senseless, stupid, unpopular, illegal war of aggression. I would say right now what we are looking at is a populace that understands how wrong this war is. Even if you just ask the person on the street, what do they know about international law, what the Constitution says about who has the power to declare war or anything like that. I don't know that people would necessarily have the strong legal arguments. They just know that this is wrong and stupid. And that's where the US population is, right? But it's not where too many members of Congress are, unfortunately. I did see earlier today, and Norman will probably talk about this, a petition that RootsAction has up, and I think it was put in the chat, to invoke the 25th Amendment. I think that's totally righteous, and I signed it. I signed it right away as soon as I saw it, and I shared it. Others, including Empower Action, which is the largest Muslim online activist group, is calling for impeachment, and that's also totally righteous. Also, and this is a very difficult slog, but there are calls for members of the military not just having the right, but the obligation to refuse unlawful orders. And I think that should be broadcast far and wide. And we should also offer the Center on Conscience and War or other organizations where you can get assistance to become a CO, a conscientious objector. So I think all of those are righteous demands. And we have a president who is clearly deranged, evil, unhinged. It's just unbelievable but it is all too believable, unfortunately, in terms of who he is. So from Peace Action's perspective, we've certainly been very active around the country, our affiliates and chapters and associate groups, doing protest demonstrations, including a big turnout for No King's Day, which, when was No King's Day? Was that like 5 months ago? No, it was what, 7, 8 days ago. I mean, it just seems unreal how time is passing. But there was a very strong No War with Iran call that we helped to uplift on No King's Day. A lot of our chapters and affiliates do really good public education and conferences. I had to miss one tonight. New Hampshire Peace Action is doing a good one tonight on nuclear weapons that I wanted to be on, but I had already committed to be with you tonight. And a lot of congressional lobbying, grassroots lobbying. And as a matter of fact, we're doing a sort of an emergency lobby training tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern time. And I will put the link for that in the chat and also our action alert that we just sent out today. So really quickly, in terms of the congressional demands, and we'll go over these tomorrow. First of all, they should get their asses back to Capitol Hill, right? They're on vacation right now while the world is burning. So the call for them to get back in session, and I just saw Ro Khanna was on my TV before I got on here, and he was talking about both impeachment and the 25th Amendment, but also what's Congress doing? Why are we not on Capitol Hill? So the three things that we are going to be focusing on, it's very simple. Nope, NOPE, not one penny ever for Iran war money, whether that's a supplemental appropriation or a reconciliation bill. I don't care what it is. And we can talk about those mechanisms if people are interested. Doesn't matter what it is. No war money for this illegal war of aggression on Iran. And remember, just Friday, Trump proposed a $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget. It's been around a trillion in the last few years, and this is outrageous. And Trump even said last week, we can't afford daycare for kids because we have to fight wars. So, he said the quiet part out loud, right? In terms of the eternal guns versus butter. And there's always more money for guns to satisfy Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Raytheon and all those merchants of death who are literally and figuratively making a killing on this war. So no war money. Nope, not one penny ever. Then there are two specific mechanisms, and you mentioned one of them, Hanieh, is the War Powers Resolution, which in the House, it only lost by one vote. And a lot of us were unhappy that they didn't force a vote before the recess, but they say they are going to bring it up after the recess. It has failed three times in the Senate, and I don't know that that's going to change. In the Senate, it was almost entirely partisan. Fetterman voted wrong. Rand Paul voted right. Otherwise, it was all the Democrats voting in favor of the War Powers Resolution and all of the Republicans voting wrong. I don't know that that's going to change, but they say that they're going to force more votes, and it's important to keep the heat, especially on the president and on the Republican members of Congress. I think it could pass in the House. Now, even if it passed in both, Trump would no doubt veto it, and there wouldn't be the votes to override it. But it's important in terms of constitutional authority and Congress taking back its constitutional authority over matters of war and peace. And then the third, which is probably the most difficult, but still extremely important, are the JRD's joint resolution of disapproval. And I'll put some materials in the chat that spell all this out for you. The joint resolutions of disapproval, Bernie Sanders from Vermont has been the only senator who's forcing these votes to stop specific weapons transfers to Israel. There have been others stopping weapons transfers to Saudi Arabia, for example. And we used that to great effect during the horrible war in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia and UAE were using U.S. weapons and U.S. military intelligence in the horrible humanitarian catastrophe in Yemen. We actually twice passed the war powers resolutions in Trump's first term. He overrode them. However, it did change the behavior of the Saudis, and they stopped their aggression for the most part against the people in Yemen. So it has been an effective tool in the past. The votes that Sanders is going to force next week, and he has three co-sponsors, Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and Peter Welch of Vermont, will be to stop the sale of 12,000 half-ton bombs to Israel and of bulldozers to Israel. And I think this is very strategically smart. And we had Bernie Sanders' top foreign policy aide on a Zoom last week, as a matter of fact. And I think pairing these two, there are a bunch more that Bernie has introduced that they could force other votes. But the 1,000-pound bombs to Israel, they're using them in Gaza and Iran and Syria and Yemen. And I forget all the countries, Lebanon, of course, can't forget Lebanon, all the countries. And it came up on the call, well, these 1,000-pound bombs, are they specifically to be used against Iran or whatever. It's like, it doesn't matter. Bombs are bombs. And Israel's using them in multiple countries with our tax dollars. And of course, Israel is a country where people have universal health care, and we don't in this country, right? So we need to stop all the bombs to Israel. And the bulldozers are very important. Some of you may remember it was 22, 23 years ago, the horrible death of Rachel Corrie, the solidarity activist from Washington State, who was putting her body on the line, and she paid the ultimate price for it in terms of a bulldozer, a Caterpillar bulldozer that took her life. And they use these in the home demolitions in the West Bank in particular. And some people have said, well, aren't they going to need bulldozers in terms of clearing wreckage and rebuilding Gaza? Yes, they will, but that's not these caterpillars that we give to the Israeli army. Those bulldozers would be under supervision of humanitarian organizations. So we're not somehow setting back the reconstruction of Gaza by saying that they can't have these bulldozers. So those are the three buckets that we're working on in terms of demands. No war money for Iran, regardless of how they try to concoct it. Support the Iran war powers resolutions and support the joint resolutions of disapproval. And I've got probably 3 or 4 links to put in the chat on this. We have a fact sheet, a lobby sheet. I have the registration form for our lobby training tomorrow, and I have our action alerts. So I'll put those in the chat, and those can be resources for folks to act on. So I just want to say thank you very much for this opportunity. And you know, when you asked me to do this, and of course I said, sure, I'll do it. We didn't know how harrowing today would be, and we didn't know if we got on this call at 8:30 and crazy madman Trump might have started a nuclear war, for God's sake. So luckily that's been averted, but of course Iran shouldn't trust Trump to do anything he says. And Trump seems to be pretty desperate at this point. I think he knows how badly he's messed up and how badly the war is going and how it's wrecking the global economy. And I think he's desperate. And so he had to make these desperate threats. Now he had to back off. And Pakistan evidently is kind of who's helped him to save face. But I don't necessarily want to get into speculation about those kinds of negotiations. Anyway, I really appreciate everyone joining us tonight. And thank you for all you can do to end this horrible, horrible war.
We put this call, and thank you so much, Kevin. It's always an honor to share the same space with you. It's actually been quite some time since we've been on a call together like this. It's been a few years, so it's always heartwarming to have you on the call, and just so honor and really privileged to just be in company with Peace Action and the work that you all do every single day. One of the things that me and some of my colleagues were talking about today has been one of the roughest days of my life in this space of activism. And um, what remains to be seen is whether or not Israel is going to uphold the ceasefire or break it in the next 2 weeks. That is something that we never know. They've violated the ceasefire time and time and time and again in Gaza, and what's happening in Lebanon right now. My heart goes out to people in Lebanon and what they're suffering through. It is just an unfortunate series of events happening. And Netanyahu has been wanting this war for a long time, right? And the Iranian regime has been preparing for this war for the past, I'd say, 20 plus years, right? And so we have two world powers, three world powers that are going at it, and it could potentially turn into a catastrophe like we were almost about to witness, as you said. One thing that's really strange to witness in all of this is the role of AIPAC and the rejection of AIPAC that we're now seeing, not only amongst some Republicans, congressional candidates who are running, who are opposing taking a dime, and that has become a very popular thing, and members of Congress who are now starting to understand their affiliation with AIPAC can cost them their seat. And so I think this public pressure has worked to the advantage of the progressive movement in the anti-war space. So just happy to see that happening. But I do want to bring up our next guest, my colleague, my mentor, someone that I admire wholeheartedly. And he, in fact, also has traveled to Iran. So he often shares many of his stories with me. And it's always an honor to be in community with you, Norman. Norman Solomon, who needs no introduction, he is the co-founder of RootsAction, journalist, author. His recent books are Word Made Invisible: How America Hides the Human Toll of Its Military Machine, The Blue Road to Trump Hell, How Corporate Democrats Paved the Way for Autocracy. And I must admit to 80 plus people here on this call that it's always so incredibly I feel spoiled when I receive your books, Norman, and I always keep them close by. And so, talk us please through how partner organizations are now coordinating nationwide actions and what we've also done from Roots Action. Let's talk through what the beginning of April 10th really looks like for us and talk about what we almost all escaped, which is like this danger of a nuclear war, really, which is escalating, but today could have been the day, just like Kevin talked about and mentioned. Take us through all of that, Norman, please.
Well, thanks so much, Hanieh, and just so appreciative of all the work you've been doing. It's difficult to write articles and write books. It's much more difficult to organize, and that's when I look at what organizations are doing and the day-to-day organizing and just keeping at it. And it's the hardest things I've ever done have involved organizing. And so that's to say that everybody on this call is in some way engaging by being here tonight with the imperative of going beyond simply expressing point of view, but as the saying goes, putting shoulders to the wheel with other people, because individually, while we need to keep ourselves motivated, we can't really move anything. It's always when we work together with others in de facto coalitions and in organizations. And on that note, I want to say there's no organization doing better work for peace and disarmament than Peace Action. And if you're not yet getting the regular emails from Peace Action, I hope you'll go to their website and sign up. A lot of what needs to be done, I believe, is very multi-layered. And so it's in neighborhoods, it's in communities, it's in the schools and workplaces and associations and different organizations and configurations that we're part of. And there's also, at the same time, what needs to be done dealing with members of Congress and that what is often referred to accurately as a blob or a swamp on Capitol Hill and along Pennsylvania Avenue. And that capacity to also interact and engage with that whole terrain of power, often very repressive and deadly power, is really part of the equation of what we need. And again, Peace Action is just superb at that. When we look at where we are now, I mean, I think there's a lot of reevaluation of how we got here. And certainly the mass media tell us we got here because there's a good side and a bad side in politics, and we're on one side or the other depending on our vantage point. I think we're learning that the problems go much deeper than that kind of dualism. We're familiar with analysis of the military industrial complex, but it is so deep. It has so many different aspects that in the current time, we need to keep challenging ourselves and each other to plow through and go deeper. An example, and Hanieh, you mentioned APAC, just in the last months, it has gone from an organization largely like a third rail for many members of Congress. You don't touch it to challenge it, to almost a ritual now, as I wrote about in a recent piece. Virtually every Democratic presidential candidate is now distancing from APAC, and yet very few of them are willing to distance at all from military aid to Israel. And I think as we look at the days and weeks ahead, that's a clue to how deeply we need to go to challenge the military industrial complex in its various forms. In 1967, Martin Luther King, in his speech at Riverside Church, said that the United States was the most violent government in the world, and certainly he was being accurate. In 2026, at this time, the most violent coalition is the U.S.-Israeli coalition, that military alliance. And that's very hard, as the saying goes, for members of Congress and commentators to wrap their heads around, because it's largely a new concept, even though it's not a new reality, but it's become more of a reality. And as we look at the opportunities ahead, one of the things that RootsAction and Diffuse Nuclear War has tried to do is engage with the idea that what happens on Capitol Hill is crucial to address directly, to visit, to communicate with people on the Hill. But there are well over 1,000 congressional district offices around the country, and they're usually not very far from where we live. And yet they get largely a pass. And I think part of it is a culture among progressives and liberals of being so grateful to members of Congress who are Democrats who do things that we like, that we pretty much wink and nod and don't want to be unpleasant to challenge them when they do things that we don't feel good about. I think that's exactly the wrong response. It's stunning to me that there are so many senatorial and House offices around the country, and so rarely do we learn of or know of any picket lines at all. I mean, picket lines are just a very gentle way to confront people in power. And yet it so rarely happens. And it doesn't take many people to cause members of Congress to be quite concerned about their image. So all that is to say that the plans and urging people and offering toolkits and so forth online to invite people to do demonstrations against the war on Iran at their local congressional offices. It's just based on trying to change or expand people's sense of what is possible. They don't need to fly to DC. They don't need to go to their state capital. They can find out where their nearest congressional or Senate offices are and do some organizing. So if you have any interest in making that happen in the near term, the next iteration of that is April 10th to 12th. And I think Bill is putting in the chat some contact information. If you'd like some last minute info, we can send you signs and all sorts of resources and network with others in your area. And you can simply email info@diffusenuclearwar.org. That's info, diffusenuclearwar.org, or you can write to Emma Claire at rootsaction.org. Again, that's Emma Claire at rootsaction.org. And we really want to provide assistance. Having done a lot of local and regional organizing, I really feel that that is ultimately where grassroots change can be forced, if you will. That often I'm afraid that right-wingers and Republicans have grasped much more profoundly than peace and social justice forces have, that everybody who's in Congress, everybody who's in the Senate comes from somewhere. And we have the power in local areas to force those changes, to be nonviolently bellicose, to confront these members of Congress who keep voting for more and more war and the misapplication of resources, what Martin Luther King Jr. called the demonic destructive suction tube that is taking resources away from human beings and funneling them into war and destruction. So that's why in this recent time, Diffuse Nuclear War and RootsAction and other groups have been pushing back against and denouncing the attacks on Iran, the warmongering proceeding, and realizing that while it's so egregious and horrific what Trump is doing, that this has basically been a bipartisan problem in terms of Iran. When you stop and think that a few months ago, Chuck Schumer took to the floor of the US Senate and attacked and denounced Trump for being too easy on Iran. And this was the critique of the top Democrat in the Senate, that President Trump wasn't being confrontational enough with Iran. And yet we know the history, and Kevin mentioned this, that it's because of Trump that the JCPOA was killed. And a footnote to that is it was because of President Biden that it wasn't revived. And that underscores the horrific dangers that we're now living under every day from the Republican regime. And yet the fact is that there's so much work to do to confront both parties as represented in Congress. This is the closing days coming up now of the congressional recess. So at least in theory, if they're not off on vacation overseas or something, they're home, they're around home. So this is a very good time to go ahead and address them directly. And they're routinely, and especially in a election year, they're really worried about local press coverage and what their images are like. And again, we don't have to go to Washington to affect that. So again, it goes back to organizing. And I would just close by saying that it's amazing what a few people can do. A few people on a picket line can really freak out those who are accustomed to not being challenged at all on their home turf. And all the more reason for us to just keep organizing.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Norman. I do want to say thank you to Sina Azodi, professor, for being here. I thought when we talked, you said, "Oh my God, Hania," and you sound sick. So I thank you for being here and joining us last minute. Norman, I do have a question for you in terms of like the human cost of war, and then I do want to talk about impeachment if we have some time to talk about that. But I do want to also bring up Assistant Professor Sina Azodi from the George Washington University, who is the author of Iran and the Bomb, the United States, Iran, and the uh, uh, nuclear question. And I will be more than happy to share the link to your book with all of our audience members, Sinajan, so
Yes,
that they
please.
so they can purchase it and enjoy it. It has been a day, Sina, for many Iranians in the diaspora and the anti-war movement. I just want to say I hope that your family's okay in Iran, and I'm holding you close to heart. We will get through this together. Talk us through what's happening with the negotiations right now. If you can talk to us about what we need to do in the next 2 weeks to ensure that we don't go back into another, escalation that's worse than the one before. And I just want to give you the floor to talk about that with us.
Thank you, Hanieh, for inviting me, and I'm sorry I'm coming late. As you can hear my voice, I'm not doing my best. And also thank you for promoting my book. Uh, Let me say a few words. The details of the 10-point plan that the Iranians had offered are now out. I think that um, uh, for Iran, it has been quite an achievement for two reasons. One is that despite all the destruction that they absorbed, they were able to achieve their political achievement and political objective. And you have to think of war as having a political objective. Wars are started to achieve a political objective. So what were Iran's objectives? One, to survive, um, and all they had to do was avoid giving the United States a decisive and definitive victory on the battlefield, which they did. They didn't win the war, but they also didn't lose, which means that for them to survive means a victory in the war. For the US, with its political objectives that were one, and this is President Trump's statements, that Iran needs to unconditionally surrender, there has to be a regime change in Iran, and the US needs to control Iran's oil. So those were the stated objectives of President Trump. And none of those happened, despite all the bombings, all the destruction. And nobody's trying to question the ability of the US military to inflict so much pain. But victory on the battlefield was not translated into a victory in the war, right? So, and I'm going with the classical definition of war as continuation of politics by other means. So that was not achieved. So this is how Iranians, I think, were able to claim victory. On the 10-point plan, what Iran is trying to do is to first ensure that there is a political settlement to this war, meaning that this war, they don't stop it, they don't cease hostilities for 2 weeks, 6 months, or a year, and then there's going to be a resumption of hostilities by the Israelis and the Americans. So they need a security guarantee for that. And secondly, I think it's a sanctions relief, and there are also some other criteria which are, I'm sure, they're open to negotiations. That is to collect fees from the ships that are passing from the from the Persian Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz and the Arabian Sea. And they said they're going to divide the fees with the Omanis. That's what they've said. They also asked for a cessation of hostilities in southern Lebanon, which I think they're going to negotiate over it. Now, I think my understanding is that in 2 weeks, on April 21st, there's going to be negotiations in Islamabad, Pakistan, to continue to basically, in a way, achieve a political settlement after these 2 weeks of cessation of hostilities. So this is what has been achieved. How can we preserve it? Um, this is the most difficult part. The question that I ask myself, I have been asking myself, is that where is Israel in this agreement, the ceasefire agreement that we have? Will Israelis be bound to this agreement, or will they consider themselves free of any restrictions? This is something that the U.S. needs to do. I've been arguing this for a while. The U.S. needs to act as as a superpower. It needs to be able to restrain its ally, which has every incentive to continue the fight. And just to prove my point, there was a New York Times article that came out a few hours ago, some 6 hours ago, that details how the Prime Minister of Israel sold the war to President Trump by making it look extremely easy and a walk in the park. We've been arguing this for a while. I've been arguing this, that Trump was sold the narrative, but now we have evidence that this war was sold to President Trump. So I think it's critical to sustain this peace or ceasefire and hopefully achieve a peace, a permanent peace, to restrain the Israelis. And I think the US can do it, and it only has to do, it only has to act as a superpower, which it is.
Mm. Thank you, Sina, for your insight. Again, very delighted to have you on the call. We needed this piece to kind of bring everything together for us. I do want to go back quickly to Norman to talk about RootsAction's initiative to launch the petition to call for Trump to be impeached, which is something that even Yasmin Ansari, the only Iranian American Congress member right now, is calling for, which I think is something that we shouldn't take lightly and we shouldn't forget about, right? We know that, we have 2 weeks now to breathe just a little bit, enough to see what happens, but the organizing continues. Can you talk us through why that is so important right now at this point, Norman, and what can we do to support this initiative? And I do want to go back to you, Sina, to talk briefly about like the human cost of war, as someone we've seen a
Yeah,
lot. So
yeah.
yeah.
Well, nobody expects that the sycophants who were in the cabinet are going to, by majority vote, oust Trump anytime soon, if ever. But Jason Stanley, who's written so extensively about fascism, makes the point that part of the way that it really asserts and entrenches itself is that the goalposts keep moving. And what seems outrageous one day, a month or 2 months or 6 months later, is absolutely considered normal. And so one of the aspects that the Trump administration has done under him is to normalize unhinged insanity. U.S. militarism just to such a tremendous extreme, and omnicidal, genocidal utterances by him have been normalized. And so by raising the question and insisting upon the option of the 25th Amendment being implemented, it's a way of saying we're going to slam on the brakes and go in another direction because we refuse to normalize this omnicidal mentality that is being so routinely expressed by President Trump. So if people just go to rootsaction.org, you'll see at the top of the homepage an action where you can sign a petition. And we're hoping the petition is widely spread for that purpose. It's a petition not begging members of the cabinet to do this, but it's a petition to the people of the United States, whether citizens or not, the people of the United States, to raise this demand in every which way that we can. And certainly, impeachment again is another mechanism provided by the Constitution for people to assert some sort of democracy. One other thing I want to say that the horror of the last 15 months, the escalation of repression, and the continuity between the ICE militarism and foreign policy militarism really underscores basic flaws in the U.S. Constitution, as if we didn't know about enough, like the Electoral College and how Senate has power over House districts. And that is that the judicial branch doesn't have any military, and the legislative branch doesn't have any military. The only branch that has military authority and military command is executive. And to be more precise, only one person in the entire federal government has military power, and that is the President of the United States. And we're seeing again and again that this is a huge hole, a huge deficit in an ostensibly democratic constitution. And that's something that we have to reckon with.
Sina, going back to you, which again, I shared Bloomsbury's website with everybody to please order the Good Professor's book immediately, so we can take advantage of his knowledge. And again, it's such an honor to have you on this call. Sina, let's talk about the humanitarian cost of war, which is often something that is not discussed. I think one of our guests always, Dr. Aisha Joman, who's the president of the Yemen Relief and Reconstruction Foundation, always talks about and explains is the humanitarian cost of what's happening in Yemen and Lebanon and Gaza and Iran. And so why does it seem so difficult to sustain public attention on the human consequences of war, right? I mean, I think I can speak for myself when I say, growing up during the Iran-Iraq war, some of my memories are of sirens going off and then us having to seek shelter downstairs. And, the radio would have to tell us whether or not the Iraqi planes have moved over so we can go back. And so that was our childhood. And the country after the war went into a state of mourning and things shifted, policies shifted, certain things became harder, hardliners became more hardliners. And so talk us through why this is so ignored in the conversation all the time.
Yeah, I grew up in the same era, but I vividly remember when the sirens would go off, the airstrikes, the blasts, everything. So I vividly remember it, unfortunately. Look, I'm gonna go all post-colonialist, if you will. What I mean by that, think of the 160 girls who were killed on the first day of the war, and imagine for a moment that if they were not Iranian, and those 160 schoolgirls were killed somewhere in Europe. Imagine how mainstream media would treat them. Right now, a month after the war, 40 days after the war, they are a forgotten history. Nobody discusses them anymore. The Pentagon says it's under investigation. Donald Trump claims that Iranians did it. It was an Iranian Tomahawk missile, which Iran does not, by the way, possess. So it's rather unfortunate to see that children who are the most innocent humans on Earth, were 160 of them were killed, and nobody is asking the question of what happened. Why is that somebody not being held accountable for this? Um, and it is not limited to those children. It is far more, the human cost of this war has been far more. I know people who lost their businesses, their livelihoods right before the Persian New Year, which was on March 20th. um, People who had nothing to do with the war. I follow on social media, there was a beauty salon that was destroyed in an Israeli airstrike, and that shop employed 30 Iranians. With the attack on the Isfahan's steel factory, that factory employed 20,000 workers directly and indirectly. So 20,000 people are now out of jobs. They don't have a job in an economy that is being strangled by the US sanctions, by the corruption that is already in the Islamic Republic. So, and these are just the human costs that we're not discussing. We're not discussing the education that has been targeted by the U.S. and Israeli airstrike. Some of the most prestigious Iranian universities have been targeted, including the Sharif University, which is Iran's most prestigious. It's like Iran's MIT, and some of the most brilliant minds of that country go to Sharif. It sends some of the best scientists and engineers to the economy, to abroad. Many of the American um, 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 engineers and scientists who are in Silicon Valley are graduates of that university. That university has been targeted by the Israelis and the Americans. Amir Kabir University has also been targeted. So it's a campaign to not to degrade the Islamic Republic, but to degrade Iran's ability as a state to function and operate. Now, I'll stop here. Iran is a country, you have to think of it, that has endured three invasions in 20th century alone, two occupations in World War One and World War Two, and yet it survived by the dint of its history, civilization, and ability to withstand pressures. It survived. But I think that this war is something else. It was a direct campaign against Iran's scientific and technological advancements, about its population that has been targeted directly and indirectly, and its cultural side, something that again, I forgot to discuss. Some of the palaces of 16th century were targeted and damaged in the attacks. And yeah, it's rather very unfortunate to witness all of that happening.
Hanieh, if I may, I want to pick up on something that's a little bit of a thread sort of touched on, but I want to emphasize this, both the professor and Norman, which is in our list of demands going forward, and people may not think of this immediately, is there has to be accountability. And I'm not just talking about removing Trump from office or Hegseth or whatever, as important as those are. There was never any accountability for Bush, Cheney, Rumsfeld, et cetera, from the Iraq War. And at least part of that was some of the Democrats saying, well, we can't waste time and energy on that. We have to move on. We have so many problems to fix, which was true. They did have so many problems to fix, but we can't let that happen again. So whether it's and there could be a whole accountability agenda for members of Congress, for Netanyahu for war crimes in Gaza, for Biden for supplying weapons to Israel. So there has to be a whole list of accountability. And for Iran, I think Iran is totally righteous in saying that they should have reparations for all the damage that's been done by the U.S. and Israel. And I don't have like the magic, here's the 8-point accountability agenda, but it's something we can't let go of going forward.
Right. Something that's really interesting, and I wish I could say it as eloquently as Sina, John just talked, with regards to like the cost of human lives. A group of Iranian American elected officials from all walks of life, different ideologies, beliefs, became together and put together a statement asking for an immediate end to the war, releasing of prisoners in Iran right now, and the list of our demands. I'm more than happy to share the Intercept article here, which covers it. I was talking to Matt Slidge this morning, who's the Intercept reporter who covered this, and we were just having a conversation about how this letter came about and why women are so significant in this moment. Putting why this holds a lot of power, and it means something to the women in the Iranian American community, is because a lot of times these wars happen under the brand of regime change, right, to liberate Iran, and the first people they talk always about is Iranian women must be free, Iranian women must be free. When these wars and these bombs that drop take away mothers from their daughters and sons and their families, when these bombs that drop weaken the civic society and the very movements that the Iranian women are organizing in Iran to move towards the freedom that they wish, which is not just to remove the hijab from their head and be able to go to nightclubs and listen to certain musics, which some of it could be that it doesn't, but it's just the equality and equity. And Iranian women are some of the strongest women in terms of education, science, and the places that they hold in the society. So this is what we talk about when we talk about propaganda, cost of war, and who it truly does impact. And I have never believed the US to be the US administration, not the American people, right, who continue to fight against these wars. But the US administration was not able to liberate Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. Certainly will not be able to do that in Iran. If anything, it remains to be seen what happens after this war with the Iranian government and the regime and so on and so forth. So it's 6:27. I do want to be mindful of the time, and it's 9:30, almost somewhere, on the East Coast side. Two of our guests are actually joining us from the East Coast. Me and Norman are on the West Coast. So, any final thoughts before we say goodbye, and what do we look forward to? Kevin?
Well, I think I really appreciate the professor's very succinct and apt description of what's going on. And so it's very easy to be disheartened. But I think a lot of what Trump has been doing is because of his desperation and his weakness, and he knows how badly this whole enterprise has gone. And of course, the human toll in Iran, but also Lebanon and other places should never be minimized, right? But Trump, I think, understands that he has really messed up badly. And I think we should all understand that we have to own our power, that we can't let this one madman drag the world to the abyss. And through all kinds of pressure, all kinds of tactics, demonstrations, congressional lobbying, pickets, sit-ins, acts of conscience, for those of us who are able to do that, we need to mobilize all of that to take our country back. And when people talk about like our flawed democracy, it's always been a flawed democracy. It's always been some flavor of oligarchy. But we can do our best to make it more democratic, more representative of the people, because the people of this country don't want this war. They don't want $1.5 trillion for the Pentagon. They don't want new nuclear weapons. They want affordable groceries and health care, and then housing and education. So we have to seize our own power and not be so disheartened by the ravings of a lunatic madman.
Thank you, Kevin. I'll go to Sina because I know you have to go as well. You're feeling under the weather, unfortunately. So, any last words?
Yeah, I got nothing to add. Really, but I excuse me. I think that ultimately, uh, Trump made a foolish mistake of believing that this was a walk in the park. And he came out, he can declare victory, he can brag about, having destroyed so many facilities in Iran until his face turns blue till the end of the time. But the fact of the matter is, when you judge victory by achieving political victory, I don't think he won the war. So I'll just stop here, and I'm gonna go now, if that's all right.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you. Good night to
But
everybody. Thank you for listening to me. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Norman Solomon, just take us through some of just share with us how you feel after this call and what is next.
Well, I love listening to the speakers, and I would just share that as it turned out, I've visited Kabul, I visited Baghdad, I visited Tehran, and it's just been awful to see news about bombs falling on those cities after I visited. And if we can imagine bombs falling on cities where we live, it starts to give us a sense of the war crimes that the US government continues to commit.
And as an Iranian American in this space, I just want to, from the bottom of my heart, with every fiber in my soul and my being, I just want to thank you, Norman and Kevin and Bill and Sina, who's not here right now with us, and the 67 plus, 80 plus people who joined this call for giving Iranian Americans and the anti-war movement hope that there is light at the end of this tunnel, and that you all have been the reason why a lot of us have been able to organize in this space without really crashing and falling apart. And so I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Special shout out again to Bill Lackemacher for holding this conversation together behind the scenes through tech and helping put all of the Zoom together and manage the chat and so on and so forth. Kevin Martin, president of Peace Action, my colleague, my mentor, and someone who I call when things are going rough. And always hearing your voice calms me down, Norman, and makes me believe that there are good people out there who care. Norman Solomon, co-founder of RootsAction. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Feel free to contact me at hanieh@rootsaction.org to get more involved with Diffuse Nuclear War, RootsAction, and to find out how we can say no more wars to Iran or no more wars in Gaza and Yemen and Lebanon, and how to rebuild a peaceful world together. We're always here to help and help facilitate and coordinate. With that, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Have a good night.